Ink up, slow down, write your rhythm with Script and Scribe.
Hi everyone, welcome to Script and Scribe. I'm Kat, and if you like a cozy video, grab your drink of choice and get comfy. And if you're that person who, like me, listens to audiobooks on Speed It Up ×3, feel free to speed this up. Today we're going to do a deep dive into my very first Smythson notebook. I didn't get this clearly because I needed one. You know that I've showed you various different notebooks already, and I've done paper comparison videos. So, you know, I've got fountain pen friendly paper. So I can't even claim that I got this specifically because it's more fountain pen friendly than my other notebooks. All my notebooks are fountain pen friendly. And that means I have a slightly excessive number of genuinely excellent options. But I've had a long-standing curiosity about Smythson, and then curiosity met a 75% discount at TK Maxx, so curiosity won. Now, first impressions, obviously the brand identity is strong and they give you this lovely bag, so the presentation's good. I think because it's from TK Maxx, I did not get the presentation box that I have seen before. But I don't mind that. For 25% of the original price, I'm okay not having the presentation box. Now, I do know that a lot of people use those boxes to archive, and I'm certainly going to be keeping this book. Aside from that presentation, which is nicely done, Smythson's signature pale blue paper is what I was worried about. And then when I saw it, I was like, this I can work with, especially because it reminded me. So I grew up in the 90s, as my schooling was in the 90s. And this actually reminds me of when I had pen pals that I used to write to. So we had the airmail paper. And when I looked it up, actually, I think they've even got it in the front of the book. So, oh no, so it hasn't mentioned it here, but I will show you from their site. Notable in Smythson's history, it was the first book to contain airmail weight paper, which later became our featherweight paper. So it inspired portable notebook because of the lightness of the paper. Anyway, so that was a wonderful first impression for me. And obviously it's also got the ASMR. So I'm not sure if you can hear that. I'll stop talking for a moment. So I reckon the moment you get this book, you know whether you're going to lean into it or you're immediately going to question your choice of paper, because it is not neutral and it's a distinct design choice. So today I want to explore whether this actually is worth it for me, even at a discount, and what you're really getting with a notebook like this. Now, what prompted me to actually take action despite having been interested for such a long time was not just the discount, because despite that long-running curiosity and then seeing the discounted one, what actually got me more interested and tipped me over the edge was watching Carl Pullian. And as much as I'd like to say I'm not influenced by YouTube, the evidence is currently sitting here on my desk. So anyway, Carl talked about it from a slightly different angle, because for a long time I just saw this as a luxury aspect or a luxury object, almost status symbol. And for me, that wasn't really of interest. But he talked about it from the point of practicality. And when I thought about it, fountain pen friendly paper, very thin pages, high page count without the bulk. Those three things are such a good combination. Yes, please. So when TK Maxx here in the UK, also known as TJ Maxx in the US, suddenly had a bunch of these Portobello notebooks, I thought, you know what, I'll give it a go. And this here is the Smythson Classic Portobello notebook in Mara leather. So it's not tiny. Mine is in cerulean blue with the crocodile embossed leather. And it's B5 size, so it's bigger than my A5s. I've got some A5 planners here so that you can see the comparison. So really nice and substantial. 192 leaves, so that's 384 pages. And they're all the pale blue featherweight paper that we've just seen, and this lovely gilt edge. There is a ribbon bookmark, which I haven't used. You can see it's still folded as it originally was, but I can pull that out. Let's have a look. There you go. And that's got a cross-grain feel to it. And they're handmade here in England. So Mara leather is not entirely matte. There's a slight gloss to it, but it's not patent. It's not very shiny. The texture is lovely, and it's meant to mimic the look of crocodile skin. They also have grained Ludlow leather and Panama cross-grain texture leather, but I'm liking this deeper, bolder pattern. Now you can see it's quite structured, quite formal and substantial. So not something that I'm constantly going to be throwing into my bag. It's very much for my desk. And I found that interesting because when you look at where Smythson started in the late 1800s, and then they developed in 1900s the first portable diary, lightweight, flexible, and designed to be carried. That idea was so much about portability and writing on the move, and that really interested me because the Portobello design in B5 is the opposite of that. And it takes that same idea though. Thin paper, tons of pages, something designed to last, and just scales it up to something that rather than carrying with you becomes something you return to. Of course, if you want something more like the original inspiration, they have a range of portable notebooks like the Travels and Experiences notebook. But my reading journal is not about capturing things quickly. I'm using it to sit down and think. It's very much to stay on the desk, and yeah, just looks like it belongs here anyway. That made me remember another YouTube video that I saw last year from Ustina Luca, and she talked about how she'd spotted these notebooks in films and TV. So I'll just mention 3 of them. Sherlock Holmes, A Game of Shadows, and that definitely had the more portable, smaller kind of Smythson notebook. And then in Gilmore Girls and The Devil Wears Prada, we've got these upscaled notebooks. And now that I have this one, I like the associations of those professional literary people working in publishing and media and having this to return to. But honestly, before there was another connotation for me because it felt more like a status symbol than a tool. And the reframing is what I needed to pick it up because I want something that is practical, and I would probably have still ignored it at 25% of the original price. I know there's people out there going, what? But seriously, I need something that I can connect with. And now that I have it, I'm so glad that I did not pass on that reduction, 75% reduction. And of course, I had to say to myself, I don't want to just overconsume. It has to make sense for me to need this. And I had a Muji planner for language learning, Kinboard Techo for daily logging, Stalogy for finance tracking, and I needed a reading journal. So this fit in perfectly. Of course, in terms of, tracking your reading, you can easily put that in the back pages of a daily journal and you can just track the basics. But what I wanted to do was really go into detailed thinking about what I've read, what themes stood out, what worked and didn't. I found that when I separate reading reflections into their own space, I write more, I think more clearly. And because I'm not trying to compress my thoughts into a small daily entry, the B5 supports my having space to expand into the ideas, include some quotes, and actually process what I've read. So this is definitely not a disposable log and more of an archive that I intend to keep for years to come. And this year, because it is a new to me product, I decided to pair each book with a different pen and ink combination, so that I can really figure out what actually works best on this paper. So let's flip through to see a few examples. In January, I wrote about an African in Greenland, Michelle the Giant, and this took me a whole month to read because it's so in-depth about this 1950s journey to visit the Inuit people in Greenland. I love the book. It's a 5 out of 5 from me. But in terms of logging, I so enjoyed writing in here. And what I did is I used my Esterbrook Estie with a fine nib and inked it up with Edelstein lapis lazuli because I wanted to try something different rather than the usual black pen and black ink. And yeah, I enjoyed it. It was super smooth. The Esterbrook uses a steel Yavo nib. And what really struck me is that the blue ink would have popped a lot more on white paper. On the blue paper, it feels almost a little bit more subdued. On white paper, the ink pops a lot more. And you also notice the gold shimmer a lot more on white paper. So I didn't mind that though. I quite liked the softening of the effect of blue ink using the blue paper. In fact, I was really tempted to stick with this combination, but there was something about the line variation, or rather the size of the lines, that made me think this is perhaps slightly boring. I didn't feel that it is standing out enough, not that it has to, but I decided that perhaps if I do use black ink, it will be more of the effect that I want. And I was right. So this here used a combination of Pilot and Hakisumi. And I wrote about the book Orlando. For me, the writing looks a lot more structured with this combination. It looks a lot looser with the Esterbrook fine compared to the Pilot soft fine. The other thing that I really noticed is I enjoyed having a little bit more feedback using Pilot because the Yavo nib, so it doesn't have to be an Esterbrook, but the Yavo nib certainly glides a lot more. So if you do like gliding, then a nice inexpensive nib to use, not pen, the Esterbrook's can be pricey, an inexpensive nib to use is a Yavo nib. You'd get that effect, and it feels really smooth writing across this paper. If you like a bit more feedback, what I found is that this gives you that, plus you get the crisp line. So yeah, for me personally, this combination worked better. And then we've got Waterman Mysterious Blue ink in a Waterman Careen medium. And this was the smoothest of all the pens that I used. It is so difficult to describe. It just glides across there. You can barely tell, or I could barely tell, that I was connecting with the paper, and I liked it and I didn't like it. Having none of the feedback in some ways made me slow down and be more aware of my lettering. So in that way, I felt that I was actually tidier on this smooth glide than on the smooth glide of the Yavo nib. Not sure if you can tell that. Obviously, you can tell with the crossing out of the Yavo nib, but that was just once. But over here, this was more like, free flow, and this here was like, I'm so aware of not feeling the paper beneath the pen nib that I was pressing a little bit more and forming the letters a bit better. So that was an interesting feel to it. And then I went on to a stub nib, and that was the Asvine C80 in Purple Ripple. I paired that up with a red ink called Red Dragon. I was curious to see how a warmer ink would perform on this type of paper because the blue is going to affect the colors that we're so used to. If we try Red Dragon on a whiter background, you can see that on the blue paper, the contrast is reduced. And in some ways that's good because it's easier on the eye. Great for longer writing sessions. But I think from doing this experiment, I started to understand why people often go for plain black ink on this blue paper. The next question I asked myself is whether I was leaning more into the soft fine or into the stub, because I do like my fine nibs and I like my stubs. And for me, again, I feel like the crispness of the fine nib has got it. That said, there's some calligraphic flair from here. So my next book that I'll be reviewing, I'm going to try out the stub nib, but with the black ink. This is definitely large enough for proper reflection. It's not portable, but it's intentional. And yeah, with 384 pages, I don't feel pressured to keep things really succinct. I like not being constrained by a small page count. So let me know in the comments if blue paper is a deal breaker for you. I'm starting to really enjoy it. And I wondered why they have blue paper. And according to Smythson, this deliberate looking blue page actually has quite a messy origin story. So the blue paper was possibly an accident, ink spilled into the pulp and kept because it was liked and then also recognizable as being Smythson. So it became trademarked in 1916. And it's definitely a core part of brand identity. So paper is so important to our overall writing experience. And here it actively changes how your favorite inks look. So when you're buying it, be aware of that. It does, for me, shift colors. The blue tone reduces contrast slightly. And that reduction of the contrast, that slight reduction of the contrast in the colors also gives you a calmer page, so less visual glare, and I think it's more comfortable for longer writing sessions. But if you're someone who likes seeing ink at its full saturation and with stark contrast, especially warm tones, high contrast colors, or dramatic sheen, I don't think that this blue paper is going to match your style. Whereas if you prioritize legibility, consistency, and a more restrained look, you're getting a really good quality paper. So for me, this paper aligns quite naturally with my reading journal needs. The more I use this notebook, the more I appreciate it. And the weird thing is that my first experience of Smythson also has these timely things crop up for me, like that's called serendipity, a happy or beneficial occurrence by chance, because I was going to do some research on the way that these notebooks are produced, just to know how things are put together. Because I was thinking, you see these other YouTube channels where people are really creative and they copy the binding of a particular book. Well, it's not an easy book to copy. And then the next day, after I was going to plan out some researching, I stumbled across a brand new YouTube video by Samuel Naldi, taking us through the production of Smythson notebooks. And that added another layer of my enjoyment of this notebook, because he opened with a statement about how putting together one notebook involves 40 to 60 steps. Now, of course, this bit I understood straight away when they were talking about the paper being so thin and specially milled, because it's noticeable straight away. There's a mix in that video of industrial printing, hand assembly, leatherwork, quality control at multiple stages, and also the adding of the details like the gilt edges and ribbon placement and the leather embossing and all of that. And while all of these processes doesn't automatically justify the retail price, the original retail price, because we don't get a breakdown of costs, the high quality materials and the in-depth in-person quality control does explain a lot. So who actually buys Smythson? From what I've seen, there are a few groups. Let me know if I've missed any. I would say stationery enthusiasts who love history, fountain pen users, professionals who write regularly, and then you've got a large group of people who and then buy Smythson on sale, like me. I'm definitely in the last group. I waited for the sale. So final thoughts, I didn't need this. I already own excellent fountain pen friendly paper that I could have turned into a reading journal, but none with as many pages as this without buying something new. So I love Midori MD. I love Batron paper. And if you're an ink swatcher, you probably already know that I love the inexpensive Muji high quality paper that outperforms many notebooks 10 times the price for ink swatching. But for straight on journaling, writing in, curiosity has its value. because this here is doing an excellent job as a reading journal. So is it worth it at full price? For most people, probably not, given that in 2026, the estimated average take-home wage of a person here in the UK is £2,400 after taxes. Buying a notebook that is roughly 10% of your take-home pay, slightly more actually, is unlikely to be a priority. At a discount, it becomes easier to justify, but it depends on how much into your stationery you really are. You do get the wonderful 384 pages, durable construction, superb quality control, brilliant featherlight paper, excellent fountain pen performance, and for me, a reading journal that will last me probably 2 years. I just want to say I never recommend spending more than feels comfortable for someone. The purpose of this video is to share my experience and say that I now have a clearer understanding of the appeal of this Smythson notebook. I have seen people wax lyrical about it, and now I finally get it. I have my throwaway notebooks from the supermarket that I scribble in and rip pages out of. I have my amazing quality yet low price notebooks that I keep and am always in awe of. And then I get something like this that reminds me that if I had chosen a journal whose binding will fall apart in a couple of years, the sort of notes that I would have been putting into it would have been less intentional and more disposable, just like the journal itself. The fact that I've got longevity here means that the notes that I am putting in there are also far more detailed, far more well thought out, and more intentional. And that's what I needed for a reading journal. I want to keep my notes for years to come, and picking up a notebook with this sort of longevity helps me fix that in my mind. It sort of shapes the way I arrive at the page, is what I want to say. So I think having seen how these are made, the process, the materials, I understand the price better, and I understand the YouTubers who say they always shop the Smythson sales. So by the time I turn the last page on this Portobello, I hope that's in 2027, I hope I make it last, I'll either be completely converted, there's a high chance of that, or I'll be delving into another brand for my next reading journal. Whichever I do, I'll be there to share it with you. Thanks so much for joining me, and take care.